Hi everyone. Thanks so much for helping me get to 4,000 subscribers. Brilliant. And as usual, do that thing everybody says. Please like and subscribe and do a comment if you want. This little collection is designed for Halloween today. Sometimes when I find stories, they don't always fit into particular categories, or they just don't feel right in another collection of stories. So these are sort of tales from the cutting room's floor, if you will. They should be taken with a grain of salt, some of them. But I think that they're perfect for a Halloween night. So, why don't you join me by the fire and listen to some eerie tales from Japan. Thank you all. This is an urban legend I heard from a friend, which is apparently true, so if you don't want to mess around with stuff like this, then please just ignore it. My friend A was studying for an exam one snowy night in January. A was in his third year of high school at the time. As the hour grew late, he heard a knocking sound coming from outside his bedroom window. It knocked 3 times. For some reason, A knocked on the window 3 times in response, since he was sat at arm's reach of the window. A's bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and there was no balcony outside his window. There should be no one out there on such a cold and snowy night anyway. A didn't have this in his mind though. He was concentrating on studying, so he didn't really question anything. Then a little later, a story he had heard from his friend suddenly jumped to the forefront of his mind, and the story goes like this. It comes when you're alone, when you're completely alone. It's always behind a window or a door where no human can be, behind a window of a 4th floor building, behind a bathroom door of a person living alone. Even coming from inside the refrigerator. It knocks 3 times, always 3 times. Those who hear the knocking aren't frightened when they hear it. Nobody knows why they aren't frightened when they hear it, but this is important for later. Once you hear that knocking sound, you need to reply with the same number of knocks. If you fail to do so, that night, you may fall asleep and never wake up. Or, more likely, someone you know will be subjected to terrible misery, or worse, death. That person is usually the person you deem most important in your life. All you have to do is knock back the same number of knocks you hear, okay? Keep that in mind. He wasn't frightened the moment he heard the mysterious knocking sound, and he knew he wasn't imagining it. He heard 3 knocks. But the knocking came for his friend, who we will call G. G didn't knock back. He remembered the story, but he wanted to see what would happen if you didn't knock back. A few days later, G got a call from a relative. His grandfather passed away. I heard this all from my friend, and man, G sounds like an idiot, right? From now on, this is my personal experience. Well, I first heard the story when I met A at university. We were out drinking and telling ghost stories. After I heard about 2 or 3 of these spooky stories, including this knocking one, I went back to my room since I was tired. Since I was at university, there was the normal amount of noise from the others in the same dorm as me. I wasn't in the same room, but the noise of the others down the hall was keeping me awake, and I was really tired. After a while, I heard a knocking sound coming from inside the wardrobe. I thought because of the story that A had told me one of his friends, if not the man himself, was hiding in that wardrobe and knocking to scare me. So I ran over to the wardrobe, I opened it as fast as I could, and there before me, I saw one of A's friends with a dumb smile on his face. I love pranks, so I wasn't even angry. So up to this point, it's just a funny story, right? I heard the knocking sound a day later when I went home to visit my parents. As you might expect, it came from a place where no one had the right to be. I heard it as I was drying myself after I got out of the shower. The knocking came from inside the shower against the glass door. I instantly copied the amount of knocks back. It was 3 for me, just like it was for A. I wasn't scared when I heard the knocking. Of course, when I told my friends about this, they just laughed at me. But honestly, please heed my warning. If you hear the knocking, you have to knock back. 5 of the people I have told this story to have heard the phantom knocking. Don't forget to knock back. I work in a cemetery. As you might expect, in my line of work, I don't usually end up bumping into many people in the cemetery. When I work at the cemetery at night, I don't even see cars drive by. I enjoy working in these conditions, so I really don't mind, but I can see how people can find this creepy. I think that this happened about 4 years ago, at dusk. A young guy approached, with the brim of his hat pulled way down. He was dressed completely in black from head to toe. I didn't think much of it. I just guessed that this guy was a bit of a goth. Who else visits cemeteries in the dark dressed in black, right? Since I was working in the cemetery, I wanted him to be aware that I was in the area, in a polite way. I called out a little greeting to him. He didn't get in the way of my work or bother me, so I just let him be. It's not polite to disturb people if they're here to mourn. There was something a bit off about him though. I couldn't put my finger on it. I was doing some maintenance and I glanced over in his direction and I saw him staring at me. I was in the process of excavating a grave and he was watching me for some time, so I guessed that he wasn't here to mourn. So I spoke to him. Are you interested in this kind of work, bud? Yeah, he replied. He seemed a bit shy, but I felt like chatting to him. I rarely meet anyone who is interested in graveyard digging and maintenance. We spoke about many things, how to dismantle a grave, how to assemble one, even about the state of the skeletons we find. He seemed to be genuinely interested and semi-literate on the subject. I kept working and he offered to help. I was grateful of his help. I tried to give him some money, but he wasn't interested in accepting anything from me. I even offered him a part-time job, but he didn't want it. So a couple of days later, I was working in my shop when a customer stormed in and started yelling at me. One of his family members had passed away, and I remember dealing with him and arranging the bones in the coffin. In Japan, the family witnesses the deceased being placed in the crematoria chamber, and they are then given allotted time to return. Once the ashes have had time to cool, the family, 2 at a time, remove the bone fragments with large chopsticks. They start at the feet, moving upwards, and placing the remains in a cremation urn, as they don't want the person to be upside down. The most sacred and significant bone is the hyoid bone, which is located in the neck, probably due to the connection between the brain and the body. The ashes can be placed in more than one urn. It's not uncommon for the ashes to be shared between the family, the temple, and even the deceased's company. The urn stays at the family shrine for 35 days and then is taken to the graveyard. Some families take it to the graveyard straight away, but it depends on the local custom. So the customer came in shouting at me that the body wasn't arranged correctly. I made up for it and went to set things right, but I couldn't believe that I made such a disrespectful, simple mistake. When it happened a second time, after I applied more care to my work, I really couldn't believe it. It may not have been a visible mistake to someone outside of my profession, but the bones had been moved in multiple graves. I remembered that kid who helped me and I thought that he could be behind this, so I staked out the graveyard when it was dark. As expected, the young man in black arrived carrying a crowbar and began heading for the graves. I snuck up behind him, grabbed him and shouted at him for an explanation of what he was doing here. He repeatedly apologized, but I wasn't interested in that. I wanted answers, so I dragged him back to my workshop. I locked him in and began to intimidate him, and I wasn't prepared for what I heard. He was stealing bones. The reason for this was because they stimulated him downstairs. He displayed the stolen bones in a jar at home. He told me that he has eaten some of the bones, particularly those of young women. He thought that he could get away with it if he only took a small amount each time from each grave. At first I thought that he was just completely mad, and I found it hard to take his claims seriously. I didn't really know what to do, so I just called the police. I was told by the police not to mention this story to anyone, since his claims turned out to be true. They were concerned because they said that they had found evidence of this guy showing off the bones online. There seems to be a bit of a subculture for this deranged act. When I was in elementary school, I heard many urban legends. Kuchisake Onna, the slipmouth woman, and many stories about cryptids and yokai. I think children these days still whisper tales of these legends in hushed circles. Well, I think that there's always truth in rumors. Each town and each school has their own urban legends, right? Well, I want to tell you about the urban legend, which turned out to be not so much of an urban legend, that ran rampant in my neighborhood. I haven't seen anyone mentioning this one online. Have you ever heard of Ayamare-san? When walking home from school, if you're walking alone, you would hear someone suddenly shout, "Ayamare, Ayamare," to you. So in Japanese, Ayamare means say you're sorry. So this person was called Ayamare-san because that's all that she would ever say. She would chase kids after school and scream at them to apologize. No one ever knew what she was expecting them to apologize for. It became such an issue in our neighborhood that there were bulletins and meetings about this woman. Ayamare-san was an old lady who supposedly lived in the area. It is said that she was possessed by some sort of spirit or demon. Others claimed that she was a witch or an escaped mental patient. The rumors became so prevalent. It was almost all we spoke about at school. As I remember, the first encounter I heard about Ayamare-san was told by an elementary school kid. Then after a while, even high school kids were having run-ins with her. 2 brothers said that they had seen her. Apparently she turned up while they were home alone after school one day. They said that she rang the doorbell, spoke in a quiet voice, and said, "Excuse me." With the boys believing it was safe to come to the door, they replied with a hello. They said that they thought it was a neighbor, but they were wrong. For the second they replied, the door thundered with the banging of fists. What soon followed were the terrifying shrieks of Ayamare-san, demanding them to apologize again and again. The boys were terrified and stood shivering in the hall as the shadow of Ayamare-san loomed behind the frosted glass. The most chilling point was the fact that none of the neighbors came to their aid. They had no doubt that the neighbors had heard the banging and screaming. There were other rumors about her. Apparently she could appear in your dreams, and on nights where the moon was full and the neighborhood was silent, you could wake from those nightmares to hear her screaming for your apologies in the dead of night. No one seemed to know who this woman was or where she came from, but just as quickly as she came into our lives, she disappeared. Rumors about her died down. Perhaps everyone got carried away with the stories about her. She seemed to only appear to those who were terrified of seeing her. Someone said that someone did apologize to her, and that's why she went away. But that could have been just a coincidence. No one could ever track down the person who apologized to her, so we just couldn't confirm it. I believe that she wasn't gone, and I was right, because I met her once. It was when I was leaving school one afternoon in October. I would try to describe her as best I can. She had very thin, beady eyes, with an insane grin on her face. Her face was close to bright red, and she was fairly old. Her hair was all over the place and unkempt. On my first glance, I knew that she was a strange person. I was approaching her, and the second I was about to pass her, she screamed at me in a voice which didn't sound human. She demanded apologies just like the legend dictated. She screamed over and over. It was truly disturbing. After she'd yelled for a while, she seemed satisfied, and then just wandered off. I've heard that some families moved out of our town because of the impact this had on their children. Well, all the people I know who have had encounters with Ayamare-san have met her after someone has told them about her. Who knows? Maybe that's the way she gets into your life, by simply hearing someone speak about her. I live in the countryside, and there is a place not too far away from town, which is renowned for street racing. I used to head out there all the time. It was just when summer was coming to an end. A weekend night. My friend asked me to go with them to the mountain pass. When we got there, we saw that there were no people in the area, even though it was a weekend. Usually on weekends, there were loads of cars and spectators on that mountain pass. The road looked darker than ever. I thought about why this was, as I pulled into the parking lot, which was often used as a place for cars to turn around in. It was the last point to turn around before you got onto the mountain pass. There were usually loads of cars parked up in this area, but mine was the only car in the parking lot. The only light in the parking lot besides my headlights was that of the vending machine. I figured out that we might be early or something, and some of the cars would turn up later, so I got out the car and used the vending machine to get a drink with my buddy. As I was scanning over the empty parking lot, my eyes landed on the opposite side of the car park. There were about 5 or 6 men and women. "Oh, looks like someone's coming after all, huh?" I said to my friend. It was really dark over that side of the car park. I couldn't really see the people clearly. My friend started shaking my shoulder and asking for us to get back into the car and get the hell out of there. I remember his voice wavering as he asked repeatedly for us to, quote, "go home." I was all like, "Hey man, wait a sec. What's the rush?" My friend didn't smile or change his stance. He just wanted to get the hell out of there. I couldn't convince him otherwise. He already jumped back into the passenger seat and locked his door. I got in the car with him and jokingly asked what the big deal was. "Did you not see those guys? They'd been staring at us the second we went to the vending machine," he replied. I could tell that he wasn't lying by the look in his eyes. His eyes kept darting back and forth from mine to the shadowy corner of the parking lot. I was eager to disprove him, and I didn't want to chicken out of approaching some people on foot in the corner of a car park, so I just revved up my car and blasted over there. I was turning a corner when something crept into my line of sight. There were several people stood around. I swear their number doubled as I grew closer. I felt really creeped out. As my car pulled closer to the group of people, I noticed that they were glaring at us, and all their eyes were black. I screamed, and before I finished screaming, I realized my friend was screaming too. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. There were others. As we sped away, at least what looked like others, they were lining the streets as we drove off. There were no cars on the street that night, coming or going. I've never seen anything like that. Black-eyed people. Well, I guess that some looked like kids. We never went back. This happened when I was a university student. I had a motorbike, and I loved taking it out for a ride now and then. I took my girlfriend at the time with me on these trips, and this is a story about what I experienced on one of those trips. Since I was a student, I couldn't afford anything expensive, so I was always on the lookout for cheap places to stay the night. Usually these were love hotels or cheap roadside inns, places which didn't need reservations. I always enjoyed looking forward to something unexpected, taking a risk, you know? I would ride along the national highway, head right out of the city, see all the natural spots along the way. I was particularly interested in checking out waterfalls. I can't remember why. The views were always spectacular. I was always checking in with the locals about the places I would visit. I remember a taxi driver told me about an old road in the area. If I rode down it, I would see some beautiful views. Well, of course, I jumped at the chance. I wanted to see all I could at that age. The sun was already down, so me and my lady decided to check into a nearby inn and look for the place in the morning. The inn was separated into 2 buildings. It was pretty cool. There was a main building and a kind of annex. The main building was modern, and the annex was an older looking style. I went to the front desk and asked for a room, but because I hadn't reserved, and I didn't want any breakfast or dinner, all they could offer us was a room in the older annex. Fair enough, I thought at the time. Our room for the night was at the end of a corridor. There appeared to be no other rooms nearby. I laughed about this with my girlfriend as we headed to the room. My girlfriend commented that we should expect that all the people who had the sense of mind to reserve a room to get the rooms in the newer building, so we shouldn't complain. The building we were in seemed ancient, and we were going to be experiencing a piece of history. I couldn't really complain. Who wants to stay in a new building anyway? So as the night drew in, my partner and I were sitting around in the hotel room doing nothing in particular, and then we heard voices, banging, and footfall nearby. I strained my ears, as did my girlfriend, and we agreed that the sound was coming from a room close by. It sounded like it was coming from next door. Whatever, we wanted to make our own racket anyway, so we didn't care. When morning came, we took a look at the view from the window, and something shocked us. Next to our room where we heard the sounds, we saw another window facing ours. The curtain was closed on the window. The curtain was heavily sun damaged, which gave us the impression that the room had been unattended for some time. When we arrived at our room, there were no other entrances near our room. So, how these sounds could be coming from what appeared to be a sealed building was a total mystery. I was talking this over with my girlfriend and she agreed that it was weird. She struck the wall with her fist one time. A knocking sound came back instantly. We went outside to investigate. There was no door in sight. A completely sealed room was next door to us, and we had just heard a knock come from it. We got really weirded out. We went to check out. Why didn't that room have a door? How did whoever got in there get in there? I know that there was something inside that room,